He did not know I could hear him. That is the part that matters. He was standing in my kitchen on a Sunday morning with his back to the hallway, and he thought I was still upstairs getting dressed. He was talking to his wife in the low, easy voice people use when they believe no one is listening. And he said, the thing he had clearly been thinking for a long time, the thing he had never quite said to my face. He said, "Don't worry about the kitchen. We'll redo the whole thing when we move in. The house will be ours soon anyway." The house will be ours soon anyway. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, in my robe, with my hand on the banister, and I did not make a sound. By the time they sat down for breakfast 40 minutes later, I had changed one document. They did not know it yet. Here is what actually happened. My name is Carol. I am 74 years old. My husband Frank died in 2020. We had been married for 51 years. He had been an estate attorney for 39 of those years. A quiet, careful man who spent his entire working life sitting across a desk from families at the worst moment of their lives, helping them sort out who got what after someone died. He came home from that work year after year with the same lesson, and he said it to me so many times it became a kind of household saying, "Carol, the will is the last word." Not the loudest voice, not the favorite child, not the one who assumes. The document is the last word, and the document can be changed by the person whose name is at the top, right up until the morning they can't. I did not understand, while he was alive, how often I would need that sentence. I understand it now. Let me tell you about my son. His name is Gregory. He is 48. He is my only child. I want to be fair to him, because he is my son and I love him, and because the truth is more complicated than he turned out badly. Gregory is charming. He is funny. He has always been the kind of person rooms turn toward. But he has also, his whole adult life, struggled with the same quiet flaw. He assumes that things will come to him. He assumes the bill is covered. He assumes the favor will be granted. He assumes the house, my house, is already, in some essential way, his. He married a woman named Diane 14 years ago. Diane is pleasant, organized, and practical in a way that Gregory is not. For years I thought she might steady him. Instead, over time, the two of them seemed to steady each other into a shared assumption. The assumption that my life was, in some sense, a holding pattern, and that the real future of the family was theirs, and that my house was an asset waiting to transfer. 8 months ago, they moved in with me. I want to explain how that happened, because it is the heart of this story. It started as a kindness, the way these things do. Gregory called me last autumn and said he and Diane were between houses. They had sold their place, expecting to close on a new one, and the new deal had fallen through. They needed somewhere to stay for a couple of months, just until we find the next place. I have a big house. Frank and I bought it in 1981, a 4-bedroom colonial on a quiet street, with a garden I still tend, and a front porch where Frank and I sat every evening for 40 years. It was paid off long ago. It is far too much house for one woman of 74. So I said yes. Of course I said yes. He's my son. That was 8 months ago. They are still here. The couple of months became a season, and the season became a way of life. They have, slowly, made the house theirs in 100 small ways. Diane rearranged my kitchen to make it more efficient. Gregory moved his exercise equipment into Frank's old study. They repainted the guest room, our room. Diane started calling it without asking. They began referring to the house, casually, in the language of owners. We should really get the gutters done. We need to think about the roof. We. And I noticed something else, something that took me a while to name. They had stopped looking for the next place. The search just quietly stopped. The conversations about when we find something became less frequent, and then disappeared. The real estate listings stopped coming up. When I gently asked, once, how the house hunt was going, Diane smiled and said, "Oh, the market's so crazy right now. We're in no rush. We're so comfortable here. Comfortable here. In my house." That should have told me everything. But I am a kind woman, and kind women are slow to believe the obvious. I told myself they meant no harm. I told myself it was nice to have family in the house. I told myself a lot of things. Then came the Sunday morning in the kitchen. It was an ordinary Sunday. I had gotten up early, the way I always do, and then gone back upstairs to dress before breakfast. Gregory and Diane were already downstairs. I was coming back down. Slowly, my knees are not what they were, and I had reached the bottom of the stairs when I heard them talking in the kitchen. They did not hear me. The stairs come down into a hallway, and the kitchen is just around the corner, and Gregory had his back to me. Diane was saying something about the kitchen cabinets, that they were dated, that the layout wasn't ideal. And Gregory said, in that easy, comfortable voice, "Don't worry about the kitchen. We'll redo the whole thing when we move in properly. The house will be ours soon anyway. She's 74, Diane. We just have to be patient." I stood very still. We just have to be patient. I want to tell you exactly what I felt in that moment, because it was not what you might expect. I did not feel rage. I did not feel like crying. I felt, instead, a strange and total clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when a thing you have been refusing to see finally stands up in front of you in full daylight. My son was not waiting for me to find a new place for them to live. My son was waiting for me to die. And in the meantime, he was redecorating around me. I did not gasp. I did not step into the kitchen and confront them. I want you to understand that. I have learned, over 74 years, that the worst thing you can do in a moment like that is react. Reaction gives the other person something to manage. Reaction lets them say, "You misunderstood, you're being sensitive. That's not what I meant." So I did not react. I turned, quietly, and I went back up the stairs. And I made one phone call, and then I changed one document. Before breakfast, I want to pause and ask you something honestly. If you had stood at the bottom of your own stairs, in your own home, and heard your only child explain to his wife that they just had to be patient, that the house would be theirs, soon, what would you have done before breakfast? Some women would have marched into the kitchen and had it out. Some would have said nothing, ever, and quietly carried that knowledge like a stone in their chest for the rest of their lives. I did something different. I went back up to my bedroom. I sat down on the edge of my bed, and I took out my phone, and I called the one person Frank had told me to call if this day ever came. His name was Daniel Reyes. He had been Frank's law partner for 22 years, and after Frank retired and then passed, Daniel had become my own attorney. He was the kind of man who answered his phone on a Sunday, because he had learned, from Frank, that the things that matter rarely happen during business hours. He answered on the second ring. I said, "Daniel, it's Carol. I'm sorry to call on a Sunday." He said, "Carol, are you all right?" I said, "I'm fine, but I need to make a change to my will. Today. This morning, if possible. And I need to ask you something first. When Frank set everything up, years ago, did he ever say anything to you about Gregory? About the house?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, carefully, "Carol, Frank and I had a conversation about that, more than once. He never told me what to do about it. He was very clear that the decisions would be yours when the time came. But I'll tell you what he said, because I think he'd want you to hear it now." I waited. Daniel said, "Frank told me he loved Gregory, but that he worried Gregory had never learned the difference between being given something and being owed something. He said that if the day ever came when you called me about the house, it would mean Gregory had started treating your home as his inheritance instead of your life. And he said, these were close to his words, 'When she calls, Don't talk her out of anything. Just help her do whatever she decides to do, quickly and cleanly. Carol will know what's right, she always did. I sat on the edge of my bed and I held the phone. And for the first time that morning, my eyes filled. Not because I was hurt, because Frank, 4 years gone, had reached forward through all that time and put his hand on my shoulder. He had not predicted this morning. He had not written a secret folder. He had simply known his son and known his wife and trusted me to do the rest. I dried my eyes. I said, "Daniel, here is what I want." And I told him I wanted to change my will. As it stood, the will left everything to Gregory, the house, the savings, all of it. Frank and I had written it that way decades ago, when Gregory was a young man and the future was a blank page. I did not want to leave. Gregory, nothing. He is my son. I will always love him. But I would not leave him a house. He was already mentally measuring for new cabinets while I was still alive and standing in it. So I asked Daniel to draft a new will and a trust to go with it. The house would not pass to Gregory. The house would pass into a trust, and the beneficiaries of that trust would be my 2 grandchildren, Gregory and Diane's children, Lucas, 16, and Emma, 13. They would inherit the house, in trust, held safely until each of them turned 25. Gregory and Diane would have no ownership of it, no authority over it, and no ability to sell it, borrow against it, or move into it as owners. Gregory would still receive a portion of my savings, a real and meaningful amount, enough to know he was loved, enough to know I had not cut him off in anger. But the house, the thing he had assumed, the thing he had been patient about, would skip him entirely and go to the only 2 people in this story who had never once made me feel like a guest in my own home. There was one more thing. I asked Daniel to add a provision, making the occupancy of my house entirely at my discretion. A clarification in legal writing that anyone living in the house did so as my guest, and that I could ask any guest to find other arrangements with 30 days written notice. Daniel said, "Carol, I can have the documents to you within the hour. I'll come myself, with a notary. We can do it at your kitchen table." I said, "Not the kitchen table, Daniel. They're in the kitchen. Come to the front porch. Frank and I signed our first will on that porch in 1981. It's the right place." He said, "I'll be there by 9. I went downstairs. I walked into the kitchen, where my son and his wife were drinking coffee, and I said good morning as warmly as I ever had. Because the second thing Frank taught me, after the document is the last word, was this: never let them see the decision on your face. Let them see it on the paper. I made my breakfast. I sat with them. Gregory was charming, the way he is. He told a funny story about something at work. Diane mentioned, lightly, that she'd been thinking the front hedges needed reshaping, and maybe they'd get someone out to do it. Our hedges, she meant. I smiled and said that sounded lovely. At 8:45, I told them I was expecting a visitor, an old friend of Frank's, stopping by to drop off some paperwork. "Nothing important," I said. "Just some old estate housekeeping." They nodded and went back to their coffee. Daniel arrived at 9, with a notary, and the 2 of them and I sat on the front porch in the morning sun, at the little table where Frank and I had signed our very first will, 43 years before. Daniel walked me through every page. I read each one. I understood each one. And then I signed. My hand, my name, my decision. The house would go to Lucas and Emma. Gregory would be loved and provided for, and would never own the home he had been so patiently waiting to inherit. The notary stamped each page. Daniel slid the documents into his folder. He squeezed my hand and said, quietly, "Frank would be proud of you, Carol." I said, "Frank would say it was a sound decision." He smiled, because that was exactly what Frank would have said. By the time Gregory wandered out onto the porch to see who the visitor had been, Daniel was already pulling out of the driveway, and the documents were already signed, and the thing was already done. Gregory said, Who was that, Mom? I said, Just an old friend of your father's. Some paperwork, nothing for you to worry about. He shrugged and went back inside. He had no idea that the future he had been measuring for new cabinets had, before his second cup of coffee, quietly slipped out of his hands. I did not tell them right away. I thought about it for a few weeks, and I decided, in the end, that I would tell them, but not as a weapon, and not in anger. I would tell them the way Frank would have, plainly, at the right moment, with the paper on the table. The moment came, about a month later, at Sunday dinner. Diane was talking, again, about renovations, about how, down the road, they'd love to open up the wall between the kitchen and dining room. I set down my fork. I said, Gregory, Diane, I need to tell you something, and I'd like you to hear all of it before you respond. Something in my voice made them both go still. I said, A few weeks ago, on a Sunday morning, I came down the stairs, and I heard the two of you in the kitchen. I heard Gregory say that the house would be yours soon, that you just had to be patient, that you'd redo the kitchen when you moved in properly. Gregory's face went pale. He started to say, Mom, that's not... I said, gently, Let me finish, sweetheart. He stopped. I said, I'm not telling you this to shame you. I'm telling you because of what I did next. That same morning, before you'd finished your coffee, I called your father's law partner, and I changed my will. The house will not pass to you, Gregory. It will pass to Lucas and Emma in trust, held safely until they're grown. You will still inherit a good portion of my savings, because you are my son, and I love you, and I am not punishing you. But you will not inherit this house. Because a person who is already measuring a house for new cabinets while its owner is alive and standing in the room has told me, very clearly, that they have stopped seeing my life and started seeing my death. The room was silent. Diane was looking at her plate. Gregory's eyes had filled. He said, his voice low, Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I shouldn't have said it. I shouldn't have thought it. I said, I believe you didn't mean to hurt me, but you did mean it, Gregory. That's the part you have to sit with. You've spent your whole life assuming things would come to you, and somewhere along the way, you started assuming I would come to you too, as an inheritance. I'm still here. I'm still your mother. I'd like the years I have left to be spent with a son who sees that I'm alive, not one who's waiting for me not to be. He came around the table then, and he knelt down beside my chair, the way he used to when he was a little boy, and he put his head against my shoulder, and he cried. I let him. I put my hand on his hair. Some things you have to say plainly before they can be healed. I want to tell you what happened after that. Gregory and Diane found a place of their own within 2 months. I did not have to use the 30-day notice. I think, once the assumption was gone, once the house was no longer something they were waiting to inherit, staying here lost its appeal. That told me something too, but I didn't say it out loud. We are, slowly, better than we were. Gregory calls more often now, and when he calls, he asks how I am, not how the house is, not how the roof is holding up, but how I am. The first time he did it, I noticed. I think he noticed me notice. The grandchildren come over on weekends. Lucas mowed my lawn last Saturday without being asked. Emma sat with me on the porch and asked me to tell her about her grandfather, and I told her about the man who taught me that the document is the last word, and that the last word belongs to the person whose name is at the top. One day, long after I'm gone, this house will be theirs, held safely until they're grown. By 2 people who never once, in all these years, made me feel like a guest in my own home. That night, after dinner, I sat on the front porch in Frank's old chair, with a cup of tea, and I wrote one line in the notebook I'd started keeping the morning I heard them in the kitchen. My son said the house would be ours soon anyway, so I changed one document before breakfast. And I understood at last what Frank had really left me. Not a house, not a will, but the steady, lifelong lesson that the last word always belongs to the person still holding the pen. Sometimes dignity does not arrive with shouting. Sometimes it arrives quietly, on an ordinary Sunday morning, on a front porch in the sun, with a notary and an old friend, and a single signature done before the coffee was even finished. I closed the notebook. The house was mine. It had always been mine. Gregory had spent 8 months assuming otherwise. And Frank, patient, careful, gone 4 years now, had spent 51 years, teaching me that an assumption is not a fact. The pen was still in my hand. It had been the whole time.